today, we thought that we'll focus on 5 themes. So the first theme we'll kick off with looking at the opportunities. So I earlier touched on a few sort of emerging technologies happening in this space. So we look at how some of these technologies we are using and to help their clients. Then the second theme that we'll touch on is challenges, right, in this adoption of the new technologies. The third theme we'll explore is about the tension between innovations and regulations, which I think is also a very, very important topic in the financial sector. And the fourth theme is about Singapore as a hub, as a fintech hub in this region and also in the world. And then the last theme we'll quickly touch on is just wrapping up, thinking ahead, what are kind of the things that we can look forward to in the coming 2 years, because there's so much happening, right? So without further ado, let's kick off. But before we do that, I just want to give our panelists a quick chance to introduce themselves in 30 seconds. So, Kelvin?
I'm Kelvin, I'm co-founder of Funding Societies. We're the largest SME digital financing platform. So basically we give short-term working capital loans to small, medium businesses, really complementing banks as well as financial institutions. We also process payments for SMEs to help them to collect money as well as make payments outwards. So we're currently present in 5 countries in Southeast Asia: Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam. We did about $1 billion in financing and $1 billion in payments last year, and we're backed by expert like Software and redefine.
Oh, great.
Hi guys, my name is Tahir Zafar. I'm the Global Head of Data and AI Strategy at the investment bank Nomura. My background is I'm born and raised in London. I spent the last 16, 17 years in consulting at Accenture and PwC, and now we're running strategy at Nomura.
Hi, good morning everyone. My name is Rochak. I'm from UBS. I'm leading the technology delivery for agentic AI products for wealth management. And before that, for about 17 years, I was in investment bank for a few years again in Singapore and Hong Kong, leading the technology risk portion of the bank. So things like cyber security, cyber controls, and risk controls in the bank.
Hi, my name is Tony. I am with JP Morgan. I've been in the banking industry for 18 years. During this tenure, I've worked in technology, front office, back office. I currently lead the liquidity and product solutions for JP Morgan across the APAC region.
Right, so thank you. Yeah, so we have speakers representing institutions and organizations with big presence in North America, in Europe, in Asia, so it's going to be a really exciting panel. Before we kick off, I just want to remind everyone that you get the chance to do a Q&A. So anytime you have, the last 5 minutes, when you have questions, just put your hands up and we'll give the mic to you. So let's start with the first theme, which is about opportunity. So we'll start with Tony.
Yeah, sure. Look, at JP Morgan, we process about 10 trillion transactions across 170 countries, 120 currencies. That's roughly equating to about 5,000 transactions per second. So if you think about the payment business, what it essentially is, has always been, is to how to move money from location A to location B. And with technology, obviously it's making that less and less, or more and more frictionless. And obviously the speed of that transfer with this new technology obviously will bring a lot of convenience to our clients. What we've seen, of course, with the rise of real-time payments in the Asia region, we've seen a massive, exponential adoption of that. What that really entails is allowing the client to be more efficient with their money, right? Delaying the pay, but they having to know that when they want to pay, they can do that delivery instantaneously. At the same time, API is not a new technology, but again, the adoption rate for API, we have also started to see an increase in terms of adoption rate. And then last but not least, there's been a lot of interest in API as well, in terms of, what is the bank doing with the API, and then we, of course, are very interested in want to invest on leveraging on this technology to allow each transaction to be more frictionless.
Sorry, do you mean APIs?
API, yes.
So I'm sure you said earlier how many thousands per second?
5,000 transactions. This is across the globe.
Oh, right. Okay, 5,000 transactions per second. So I'm sure that there's a lot of hurdles and bottlenecks in terms of infrastructure and other aspects that you have to consider before you can make this happen. So we'll talk about that more in the challenges now. Rochak, so UPS, what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, before we go into the specifics of some of our public use cases on AI, I think it's worth seeing what is the impact that these incredible tools are doing to each one of us in the workplace. And I don't think in the human history, that's my feeling, I don't think in the human history we've ever had access to such amazing amount of tools that we have right now in our workplace. And that is incredibly breaking the barriers that we have. Previously, if you recall how teams used to work, right, we used to have silos, we used to have technology, we used to have business, they used to be sitting on different floors. We were trying to bring them together during the agile structure, but all of that has now broken. And with all the teams working together, there's an incredible opportunity for people to actually collaborate and deliver something simply amazing. And the other thing I would say is that rather than using AI right now, we are not targeting incremental improvements like we used to do in the past. We are no longer doing automation, we are no longer doing optimization. That is old news for us. We are now looking at radically transforming the way we do it. 10x is the mantra that we have right now, which is 10 times the productivity with 10x, which is 1/10 of the time that we take to build something. And we are on our way, right? This is not just mantra which we are just putting it out there. This is how we are operating right now. And one of the things which I deeply like how UBS has done, like a few years back, when you would be using messaging application to talk to another employee in the bank, you would be able to see their name, you would be able to see what rank they are. But all of that has not gone away, right? So you do not know whether the person on the other end, whether they are the president, whether they are the managing director, or whether they are an intern in the bank, which is incredible because all that matters is what is your role, what is the value that you're bringing on. So incredible transformation in the culture. Every person right now has the tools and the opportunity to basically become their own boss right now. I'm now leading the group for agentic AI development, which is basically building all of these agents that can optimize and do some of the processes for us. And at least my goal is that by the end of the year, we need to have more number of agents than the number of employees in my department, right? So we want to assign each of these agents a unique ID number. We want to treat them as employees. And that's where we want to go. That's what we want to gun for. I do want to end with maybe one very interesting news which people may have seen about UBS, right? It is we have actually deployed what we call conversational avatars. What that means is that for our advisors, rather than they having to have a video conversation with their client, trying to explain to them what the equity research investment advice is, there are now videos available where AI avatars are being made of these equity analysts. So we've got 36 equity analysts whose avatars have been made, and then their video is being sent to our clients. Now, the advantage of doing that is basically twofold. Number one, there's no longer the need for you to coordinate your time based on the availability of the client. And secondly, there are many equity analysts who are very good with what they do. Intent is very strong, but they might not be very good in communicating. They might be camera shy. So a lot of the times this is not very equal and inclusive. And with AI now, these equity analysts can basically get their content recorded in a conversation avatar and we're deployed it across the globe right now. So yeah, very, very exciting things which are happening, and happy to talk more.
Yeah, so you touched on a couple of things that I think it's quite interesting, like the rise of virtual, the metaverse that we are, going to be slowly experiencing, and it doesn't matter who is on the other side of the world, but you didn't mention deepfakes could also be a possibility, right? And then the second thing that you mentioned is the rise of AI agents, right? And then there's a lot of discussion also as well that the future of the workplace is going to be very different because we're no longer looking at human-to-human collaboration, but human-to AI collaboration. I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit more. And you also are in the AI space at Nomura, so tell us what's happening. Besides AI, I'm sure there's a lot of other things.
It's all AI. So I guess echoing Rochak's, I mean, we are really fully invested in AI. Right at board level, we recently just established an AI Center of Excellence within the firm, located here within Singapore. And we're really looking at use cases across all of our business lines and also our corporate functions. And I guess just to give you a flavor of the types of things we're doing, if I look at the front office, we're doing a lot of things around anomaly detection for trade surveillance or for sentiment analysis of market news. In our wealth management division, we create a lot of proprietary research. So we've got research summarization and trade recommendation engines, and then a lot of content generation. So within the investment bank, we've got pitch book generation. In our risk department, we've got credit memo generation. In our finance department, we were automating the P&L process, and that's like a mix of kind of machine learning, rules-based, but then also putting Gen AI on top of that as well. We're also using it for reviewing potential conduct, trader misconduct as well. So, and then obviously in tech, we're also doing it for code generation as well. So if you look at it, I mean, the amount, I think we've got a portfolio right now of over 100 different use cases that we're looking at. 50 of them are in kind of development stage right now. So yeah, massive transformation coming over the next few years.
Right. So you touch on recommendations. Is it stocks recommendations?
Yeah. So for wealth management, so stock indices, trades, FX, the whole bag.
And fraud prevention as well.
And fraud prevention.
So there's a lot of questions around, fairness, accuracy. I'm sure we touch on when it comes to AI.
I'll definitely suck onto that one.
Oh, cool. All right.
Takes up a lot of my time.
Oh, cool. Okay. Kelvin, not AI or AI?
So, given that we're a black sheep among all the banks here also, so actually AI did not make as much of a good impact for us as a fintech company. But generative AI was a step change for us because it solves two fundamental problems in the whole SME financing space, right? Why do banks don't serve SMEs as much? Number one, operating cost is too much. And number two, the whole human touch element was very high. And number three, the heterogeneous set of data and risk factors are so high such that it's quite hard to manage over credit risk, right? I think Gen AI helps us solve two things very well, right? One is that from an operating cost perspective, now we don't have resources to have an AI center. But what we do is that we start grooming batches of team members, non-business people, to start automating their own role. So that, hey, I don't need to have such a big engineering team. My non-business people are literally going to ChatGPT that, hey, this is my role, this is what I want to automate, what are the tools I should use, this is the script I should write, okay, I find out I face issues, let's go to the AI team that can help me to problem solve, right? So it helps us to actually save operating expenses quite a bit, and we're actually measuring results by number of headcount reduction on a month-to-month basis, right? So of course we're not firing people, every company has natural attritions. So basically we're just keeping reducing that feeling as a result of that, that's number one. Number two is heterogeneous data. So of course, bank statements are straightforward, credit bureau are straightforward, even payrolls are straightforward for consumer lending or even payment transactions. But when it comes to SMEs, every single financial statements are different. The definitions are different, the formats are different, so on and so forth. Every invoices are different, right? And that actually creates a big issue when it comes to a fintech company whereby if I don't have data, if I can't digitalize it, what AI am I running? But Gen AI allows us to actually sort out heterogeneous data, unstructured data in a very efficient way, and it helps us to match with the 10 years worth of loan repayment data that only we have in that because we've been doing lending in this space. Actually helps us to power up our credit scoring quite significantly. The last one is really human interactions, right? That, hey, SME owners, tauges, all that talk to a human. Yes, you can have a good chatbot and so forth, it helps to a certain extent, but human interaction becomes very helpful, right? So what we have done is two things, right? Be it across the usual chatbot, the question is that how can we actually start building empathy towards it? And we're very, very pleasantly surprised and impressed that, hey, SME owner, the husband just passed away. Instead, and when they come to us for help, the first thing that the chatbot said wasn't like, hey, please owe money, pay money, was, oh, I'm so sorry about this, how can we help you, and so forth. How can we build empathy or humanize AI? Also, on top of that, how do we use voice? Example, most of the banks have many telemarketing folks, collection folks. If people can use telemarketing for scams, surely we can use it for good, right? So we have been actually actively using in terms of, hey, how can we help to follow up collections that we are strictly following up with the borrowers 4 times a day because of the regulatory limit. We know that we professionally spoken because it's all scripted or it's running through the databases, both from the sales and collections perspective. So to that extent, it actually really changes the whole business model from an SME digital finances.
Okay, so it sounds like it's a big opportunity in terms of Gen AI, but I'm sure there's a lot of other technologies that you leverage as well to serve your clients better. So we just briefly skimmed the surface in terms of opportunities in the fintech sector in this digital era. So let's move to the second theme, which is challenges. So if I may come to you since so challenges, I'm sure there's a lot, you just talked about Gen AI and how it really empowered your company or employees, right? But I'm sure there's a lot of leading issues in terms of deploying it, implementing it, training the AI, the empathetic.
So I think two things, right? Internal as well as external, right? If I look at external perspective, the reality is that a lot of the tools that we have in the market are not built for Southeast Asia. So for example, yes, there's a lot of voice calling tools and so forth, right? Can the voice calling tool switch between English and Hokkien and Mandarin for a Singaporean audience? The answer is no. So end up we actually have to train a lot of these tools by ourselves using our own information, right? Because we can't buy it off the shelf also, which also gives us opportunity that at some point can we actually sell this as standalone tools. So that's from an external perspective. From an internal perspective, what we see is that really getting people to think sometimes is the hardest thing in the world, right? So just getting people to think about use cases, it really takes someone with certain level of commercial sense, imagination, so and so forth, rather than flushing it top down that, hey, this is what you're going to do per se, right? And what we find is that two things. One is we are starting to incorporate into a hiring process. In fact, we were chatting to one of our big payments giants that have just raised 300 million USD recently that one of their hiring policy, interestingly, is to not hire from banks. Like, personally, we think that bankers have great contribution also, but really just changing mindset itself is a huge thing for us. Therefore, we actually have to start with the early innovators, the early majorities, right? That whoever wants to adopt first, it is a privilege, it's not an entitlement. But whoever does it, we actually go through a selection process that we are putting in big, meaningful money to train you. Please come up with a proposal of what you want to automate. We'll run through a selection process, we run through a training. You have like in university, right, office hours, that if you face issues automating it, please come to us. But after that, we expect you to present, and then we go to batches by batches, right? So that's not like, hey, an entitlement that everyone can do it. No, it's only the top 15-20% of people, and then 30-40% of people. So really, people who want to do it is start moving it, so that we can drive a cultural change within the organization.
Right. Okay. So I come to Tahir, right? Kelvin just mentioned that the mindset between the financial institutions and the fintech, the younger companies, the mindset when it comes to adopting technology is very different. I'm not sure what your experience is.
Yeah. So I think that let's start from the top. Cost, right? Cost is number one. If you think about producing a POC in modern development, if that costs like say $1, you actually implementation to get it all the way into production grade is probably about 5 times that, so 5. And the reason for that is you've got the data engineering behind it, you've got to clean the pipelines, you've got the change management involved, you've got to get it into the workflows, and that the change management processes along with it. So the cost gets exponential as soon as you're thinking about production. And so I guess my feedback really there is, really focus on the use cases that are aligned to your business strategy and according to your risk appetite, and make sure you're going for the highest value items, right, for production. So that's probably number one. Number two then, I guess, is all around risk and governance. I guess as a financial services organization, that's obviously paramount. What we've done internally within Nomura is we've actually set up an ethics review board. So all of our use cases all go through an ethics review board. So this is a multidisciplinary group made of like HR, legal, compliance, third-party risk, op risk, cyber, etc. So they approve everything that goes through. And then obviously then a byproduct of that is that now a lot of our developers and designers are really thinking about compliance by design. So what do I mean by that? I guess in the same way, like an architect never really designs a bridge and then thinks about safety afterwards. You really think about safety from a first principles basis. And so, that's what we now do is looking at compliance on a first principle basis for our model development. And then the final piece is really all around benefits realization. All of the brochures, everything that I see is like, 30%, operational efficiency here, 20% revenue here. But actually quantifying it and measuring it is extremely difficult because usually it's only one kind of small task within a wider process. So the other thing that I'm trying to do is really think about, well, what are the other indirect benefits that you get? So I think about 6 months ago, there was an MIT report around, yes, you do get significant operational gains, but then you also get loads of other indirect gains. So for example, like, I don't now need to think about writing this email to the same degree that I would. I don't need to create this document in the same way that I would. So you're really like reducing that cognitive load of the employees, therefore reducing stress, therefore increasing engagement, increasing retention, increasing team morale. So all of these indirect benefits, I think we need to start thinking about that in terms of the wider context of benefits.
Okay, it sounds like Nomura has quite a good framework in terms of deploying new technologies.
Trying to get them to think about it.
right, okay. So what about EBS?
Yeah, I mean, very much similar to what Nomura has in place, right? But I'll speak of something different, right? So I come from an engineering background, a hands-on engineer, so my problems really are more engineering problems. When you're trying to build these solutions, there are problems with respect to very specific problems. How do you build it? Do you have the right people in it, right? Getting the right talent to actually work on these use cases, because some of these opportunities which you spoke about earlier are so incredible that it is not technology who is eager to deploy them, it is the business who is more eager to adopt it. And I've never seen that in my career where the business is coming and telling us, hey, can we have this? They're coming and drawing mock-up diagrams and actually showing it to us, hey, can you deliver this to us? So there's an incredible excitement from the business side, but from an engineering side, we still have to solve fundamental engineering problems. We have to make sure that the data that we use is correct, the right data governance policies are in place. Do we have the right encryption in terms of what data we're using? Specifically talking about AI, when you're building models, what kind of data goes into that? You spoke about fairness, ethics, all of that, right? That is part of the model building. We have a process called MRMC, which is the model review governance process. Basically, I think it's very similar to what Tahir mentioned, right? That the model goes through a number of levels of approval, from a legal, from a compliance standpoint. By the way, if there's any financial institution in the audience right now, I'm actually working together with MES on a program which they have launched called MindForge, MINDFORG. JP is also on it. It's a consortium of banks, and what we are trying to do through that initiative is write the first AI governance handbook, which can be then freely deployed to any institutions in the market. So any organization who wants to implement a proper governance with respect, a very practical guide. These are not policy papers, these are practical guides on how do you, for example, set up a proper working and an operating model to be able to do a lot of these things. So we have identified 48 different risks which are out there, and we're writing down this practical paper. So MES is leading that. We are part of the consortium. I sit on the steering board for that one. So there is a practical guide which is coming out, and the engineering technology problems. I think one of the big things that I'm trying to do right now is get as much as possible in the hands of the business so that I can keep them satisfied, but at the same time try to calm them down, because the technology has limitations. Anyone who's in the audience who's a developer would actually know that especially if you're building things with AI agents, it's very difficult to get them to behave in a deterministic manner. If you try to design your agents in such a way that you want your agents to do a lot of work, you will realize very, very quickly that they will lose their memory, which means that they will lose the state, and that means the output may not be what you're actually looking for. So you actually have to build much more granular agents than what you initially designed for. So these are engineering problems that we are trying to solve as we go along.
Yeah, there's I guess famous terminology in AI, right, which is hallucination, and that's a separate topic from this panel. So I think what has come true is people policies are quite important in deploying technologies. But Tony, you spoke about some of the challenges when it comes to even the pre-adoption stage. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, look, as a bank, right, we service our client, and often than not, we see our clients' adoption rate of new technology tend to be quite slow. I mean, obviously, you can understand the client themselves have internal policies and governance framework that they need to go through. As I was saying in the earlier session, right, API is not a new technology, but only recently we started this really increasing adoption of API. So they have arrived at the API era. So for AI, I feel that although it's a very prominent technology right now, for some of our corporate clients, right, the adoption speed may not be as fast as we would like to be, at least from a bank perspective, because ourselves have started using AI as well, right? And then I was mentioning earlier, with the amount of transaction we process, AI does create that efficiency. I mean, especially when it comes to sanction screening, fraud detection, because we have abundance of data, right? Data is at our disposal, right? We bank so many clients, so data is abundance, but and therefore costs, yes, I think I resonate with a lot of panels here, right? Cost, budget concern, all that is there, but also building AI, right, to feed onto data, that takes time. And then I guess this is where some of our internal stakeholders comes in to say, okay, what is the right way to use AI on certain things? So right now, obviously our largest use case obviously is transaction, fraud detection, prevention, etc. I will sort of leave with this, right? And I take a quote from Spider-Man: with great power comes great responsibility as well, because there are bad actors out there that uses AI to sort of trick the system. So again, one of the challenges is how do I know this transaction is actually genuine or fraudulent? So you sort of play this mind game AI against AI. I guess this is sort of like that. That's how we see it.
Yeah, that takes us very nicely to the next theme, which is about innovations, the tension between innovations and regulations, because Tony talked about how we are using AI to for fraud detection, same as Tahir and I guess the other panelists. And so I guess that kind of overlaps with some of these regulatory requirements when it comes to consumer protection, when it comes to scam prevention. So can you talk a bit about what are some of the regulatory guidances or requirements out there that yourself and your clients need to comply with when they adopt one of these AI type technologies or non-AI?
So from an AI perspective, we definitely don't know what the client's doing on their side, right? We process payments for them and so forth. So I guess from a bank perspective, we obviously want to tread very carefully in this space as well, right? So we definitely work very closely with many regulators, right? Just to make sure that whatever we roll out meets the sort of regulatory framework. Again, we also have something called change management, right? Just to cross all the T's and dot the I's, just to make sure we're very compliant. We don't use or abuse any of these technologies that we're starting to roll out as well. So I mean, yeah, it's a fine balance, I would say, between like adopting new technology, but at the same time, like what is the right thing to do as well.
Right. Okay. And Rochak, you are a cybersecurity specialist, so I'm sure you have a lot to say about technology risk, compliance, and regulation.
Yes, I mean, I think in every panel or in every speaking place that I go to, right, I always say we're incredibly lucky that we are here in Asia, we're here in Singapore. I'm a big fan of, and you wouldn't hear a lot of people say that, I'm actually a big fan of MAS. The way they do it, I almost think that they are part of a product team rather than something where I've built a product and I have to go to them and say, hey, approve something, right? So they are actually part of the journey. Of course, if you look at their tools that they offer, they have a regulatory sandbox. So if you're a startup, a fintech startup, even a big bank like us, and if you're developing something, we can make use of the regulatory sandbox. They have an incredible partnership with a company called ATxSG. What that basically does is, rather than we trying to connect to all of the APIs of all the fintechs in the market, we can actually connect to ATxSG, and ATxSG has got all of the API connections of over 1,000 different fintechs in the world. So that really speeds up the development of how we are building these products. I already spoke about Mindforge on how we are collaborating to write a governance handbook. They also have this tool called Veritas, which actually helps you verify that the model that you're using or the AI pieces of work that you're building, it is actually going to be compliant with the fairness and the ethical model out there. So it's actually a tool out there which is open source, so you can actually go and download the GitHub package out there and you can test your models against that, so you're not surprised by what comes at the end. And one example which I would give you, right, is they've actually got a lot of regulatory clarity in this. So for example, a lot of the use cases have been divided into high risk, medium risk and low risk. And a high risk use case would be a use case where, for example, we're using the facial patterns or the behaviors of an individual to utilize AI. Now, those high-risk cases, we have internalized in our policy to say that we would absolutely not build on that. So rather than a developers or a dev team spending 6 or 7 months building a use case where, let's say, on the basis of your facial patterns, we are able to detect what kind of sentiments you're having, right? I mean, a lot of these things can be done, but rather than doing that and then trying to go to an approval stage and then be disappointed saying that you've wasted your 7 or 8 months, we have actually used these regulatory guidelines, made our internal AI policy, and made it incredibly clear what use cases are going to be allowed or not, right? So people at the very start of the process are getting that clarity. And one other thing I would say is I'm also part of this body called ASIFMA, which is a association of all the financial institutions here in APAC. And what we do as part of ASIFMA is we collaborate with regulators across not just Singapore but Hong Kong, Japan, Australia, Taiwan. And what these regulators do is that before they publish a regulatory guideline out into the public, they would first come to ASIFMA and then they would give us a heads up just to get a feedback. And again, if you just think about from a regulator standpoint, this is incredible because they're getting an opportunity to talk to financial institution members who know what they're doing. We can actually feed them back, and I've got like live examples where we have actually made a change to the policy where we have fed back to Hong Kong HKMA in this particular case. HKMA took our feedback on board, they modified that, so before those guidelines became public, they were actually modified. So a lot of regulators actually do want to support us, and from that perspective, I think it's a great partnership.
Oh, great. We have experience working with other countries, so pick your brains when it comes to discussing or exploring the next theme, which is Singapore as a hub for Fintech. Before we do that, Tahir, yes, regulations and,
Yeah, I mean, similar. Obviously we're a global bank as well, so like literally in the last year and a half, I've literally had every single regulator come up to me and say, what are you doing with AI and how are you managing that risk? So it's very much top of mind. I guess a couple of things I'll say here is, and to be honest, I echo a lot of things that Rochak has done at UBS, but there's so many regulations guidelines right now. There's the EU AI Act, which is probably the most comprehensive. There's the stuff going on at MAS, like the FEET stuff. There's the SEC guidelines, there's the US Act, there's so many. But actually, if you kind of look under the surface, there's loads of commonality amongst all of those, right? So generally, like the rules around taking a risk-based approach, like high, medium, low, the same way that you spoke about, is very much a fundamental across all of those. Monitoring is fundamental, testing, accountability, all of those things, to be honest, are very common across the board. So that gives me a level of comfort, I guess, particularly looking at things globally, because you want to reduce that kind of regulatory fragmentation across the different geographies and essentially go for the most stringent, so then you can operate globally, right? So that's number one. And then the second thing is, I think if you actually read the regulations right now, and again, to Rochak's point, a lot of it's been done through consultations right now. The regulation, I would say, is extremely high level right now, and there's lots of room for interpretability. Which means actually, I think when it comes to implementing some of these in 1, 2, 3 years time, I think there's going to be a lot of struggle to understand actually, are we meeting our compliance obligations there? And what you'll then see is probably have some unintended consequences coming out in the market, and then you'll probably start seeing a tightening of the regulations, again, over the next 2, 3, 4 years. So I think it's just something that we need to be prepared for.
so the time scales are compressing. But there's a comfort, like you say, despite the number of regulations, there's some common sort of themes out there. Yes, Kelvin.
Probably two different points. One is that while I think developed markets regulations are relatively clear, like emerging markets, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, candidly is quite big, at times non-existent. Similarly, like what Tahir has mentioned, right, that actually a lot of this is quite, a lot of the regulations, even as of now, is quite high level. So actually, we face a situation, example, in that I'm in Malaysia. Should I follow the highest standard in the whole region, let's say Singapore, where which international players, perhaps like big banks like UBS, JP Morgan and Nomura are doing? Or should I follow with local players that have a bit more nuanced guidelines or so, right? But if you're going to go by the international standard, you'll lose the local market. If you go by local markets, hey, like in Singapore, right, compliance person will start asking like, hey, what are we doing as a regional company, right? And then you end up a situation where, hey, this is the regulations. Besides reading the English of the regulations, and because a lot of compliance and risk officers actually do not commercials and the business realities on the ground as much, how do I go by reading the English of the regulations, which is quite high level, to local context and realities, right? That is actually the struggle where we have most debate. And some of these conversations will be quite technical. Example, when I do an AI telemarketing call, do I need to identify myself as a bot or not? Upfront in the conversation, it's not quite, there's so-called best practice here and there are best practice on the basis of what. And yes, if you do this, what does it happen? If you do it, what does it happen, right? That's why actually what Tahir mentioned, you mentioned three also should be very critical, right? Based on first principle of compliance, right? That a lot of compliance officers unfortunately don't know why a law or regulation exists for what reasons, right? The question is exactly what risks are we addressing, how big a risk, low, medium, and then we make the policies accordingly. And then discussions oftentimes is quite a big one also, right? So I think from a compliance perspective, yes, high level wise there is guidelines and whatnot in developed markets, but how do we actually translate to execution? How do we translate to emerging local nuances? That becomes very critical. And because it relates to easily escalates into corporate governance, blah blah type of conversations, oftentimes CEO step in and spends quite a bit of time. But we do think that once we set the right mindset and framework on, it's a time where our standards are. Number two is that when it comes to just using fundamentals, okay, AI built on what data? And like what Tony mentioned, right, APIs is a big thing in the US, and we see a lot of big companies and tech companies were grown on the basis of APIs in the US and whatnot, and China just going IPO, right? But if you look at Southeast Asia, up to today, open banking or APIs are still relatively limited. Like every bank will say that, hey, I this API, that API. Ask the market how many actually are connected to these APIs. How useful is it really? It really is, right? Actually, it's relatively limited, right? And our view is, and the usual conversation is, oh, you don't have cybersecurity standards, data privacy standards. Then the question is, please give us clarity on what we need to achieve, what is the cost we need to share, and we will deliver it, rather than keeping it vague, such that it's always a moving target, therefore it's always a no. There's no light at the end of the tunnel, right? The end of the tunnel is another tunnel, right? And you just keep stringing on also, right? And we do think that because data transferability, we appropriate data privacy control, so and so forth guidelines are a public goods. Actually, we do reckon that from a government perspective, it requires a certain level of regulatory push to encourage local financial institutions to actually open up data in a win-win, meaningful way for the good of the society.
Alright, did you say that data is a new gold in this digital era, isn't it? Like, it's no longer oil, it's data. But yes, so we got two more themes to go through. The next one, which is Singapore as a fintech hub. And since you talked about, some of your experience working with international regulations and local regulations, how do you see Singapore in terms of as a fintech hub, learning from other countries and vice versa?
So I think it's a huge topic, but I think for us, we find that from an overall, if I just break it down, what are probably three key success factors, and I guess every other countries are trying to figure out, right? Really people, infrastructure, as well as regulations, right? We just talked about that when it comes to AI or even Gen AI per se. We do find that a lot of the tools that are available in the market candidly are more built for bigger markets like the West, or even let's say India or say China per se. Right? Southeast Asia actually are relatively fragmented. So we do think that from this key perspective, A, there's a meaningful market for Southeast Asia to serve. B, from a talent, infrastructure, as well as policies perspective, candidly is a bit ahead of the regional market. Therefore, we actually are quite excited in terms of how Singapore is leading overall region in terms of overall AI space. Having said that, we also reckon that candidly Southeast Asia is not the biggest of space. Many fintech companies or even tech companies realize that, hey, winning Southeast Asia doesn't make much difference because there's not enough capital markets to support us all the way to growth stage or even to IPO stage. And if we are going to the US market, or if the exit or the final price will be in the Western markets, you are forced to actually expand to a Western market. So which also means that yes, being number one in the region, being a meaningful player in the region may not actually be relevant. Hence our view is the question is how can we actually segment out areas that we can win for the region and what are areas that can potentially be, which serves as a springboard to win certain niches in the global market.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so Tahir, how do you see Singapore in terms of ecosystem strength versus funding opportunities versus talent?
Where do I start? I think. Well, firstly, I think the fact that Singapore contributes to the OECD and the G7 AI frameworks, that immediately already puts it onto a level playing ground like globally. So that's great. And then I think if you look at those three, I'll take your framework. If you look at talent, I think Singapore does an excellent job of developing junior talent, but I think it still has to import professionals from around the world. But I think it does a good job of attracting that talent, case in point. Secondly, then is what I would call the what am I going to say? I guess the ecosystem, right? And by that I mean organizations, companies, academics, all of that. Again, I think it does a really good job of kind of bringing all of those institutions together. And it also has lots of schemes, right, to encourage people. So you've got the Financial Services Technology Innovation Scheme, you've got the Economic Development Board, you've got all of these different schemes looking there to make you successful. And that's a big reason why we, for example, set up our AI Centre of Excellence here, because of the collaborative nature in which we can work with MAS and the government. And so, yeah, and I think the other thing is just vision, right? I think they've got an excellent vision. They're probably one of the first countries that actually wrote a national AI strategy. Obviously, it doesn't have the deep pockets that, say, the US or China has, but I still think what it has done is it allowed itself to compete with the likes of, Saudi Arabia, UAE, those kinds of regions. And obviously, they're attracting a lot of talent now within, and it's definitely the number one hub, I'd say, in Asia. So I think Singapore's done a great job.
Okay, thank you. Rochak, yes?
I think what I would add to that, right, since you brought up Middle East, right, I've been to Middle East a number of times. My family is there, and in fact, I was at GITEX and a few other speaking events at Middle East, both in Saudi and in UAE. And one thing which I realized there was a number of the speakers that they were calling in were actually from Singapore. Which actually tells you that something that we are actually doing something right, and I say this as a proud Singaporean, right, that we are absolutely doing something right now, which is why people are actually looking up to us. And in addition to the AI strategy, of course, we've got a very mature cybersecurity framework here. The CSA is doing a great job there, and I see them talking about it a lot in the Middle East countries. We have also deeply invested in Singapore. We have got our AI transformation factory, which is what I'm a part of now. So the AI transformation factory is basically it's not just a culture that we have, but it's actually doing practical work where we are improving a lot of customer journeys that we have through the use of the tool sets that are now at our disposal, which are not there before. We are incredibly invested in talent as well, graduate talent, hiring talents, trying to upskill them. If there's anyone in the room who is interested in any of these sort of careers, I mean, don't come to me. I noticed my UBS APAC talent lead is in the chair right now, so I can direct you to her, right? Sorry, Astik, right? So you can come and talk to her. But we've got a huge amount of talent there, which we want to absolutely invest in. And one other thing also is there are a lot of schemes out there, right? So there are schemes out there which people can take part in. We are also mentoring a lot of startups. So we were running a program called Future of the Finance, through which companies that were up to, I believe it was 5 years old, they would come in and they would take part in the competition, basically show us what their products were, and we would then, if we liked them, we would give them an opportunity to work with us, right? And a lot of these companies actually came to us and we mentored them. We are also working together again with MES here in the region to mentor companies, both in the Fintech, RegTech space. So incredible amount of stuff is happening here, but I think the only thing I will say here is that there are others who are trying to catch up as well, right? So we cannot take this for granted because there are others out there who are catching up very fast. They've got deep pockets, right? And we just have to be on our toes, is what I'm going to say.
Right. Yes, I think all the panelists here should, stay in Singapore and wave the Singapore flag, right, permanently. Yes, Tony. So, how do you see Singapore as a fintech hub?
Yeah, I think Singapore's advantage, I guess, is in a very unique location and does a very good job of attracting talent. And I resonate with all what the panelists have mentioned. Sorry. So retaining talent, attracting talent, I think that is a big plus for Singapore. And I think Singapore also is at a unique stage whereby there are other countries that has already gone there. So what I mean by that, China for example, you have your Alibaba, you have your financials. These are all startup fintech companies. And then there's a model which Singapore can look at and say, okay, this works, this doesn't work, and sort of adopt their own approach in building that fintech community. So, and I would say that locations like Australia is not something that we also should look at, or even New Zealand, like Zero, these are fintech companies that start from there. Again, like I said, I think Singapore is uniquely positioned in both in terms of timing as well as geographic location.
Interesting perspective. Your take on the timing angle. Right. Yes. So we have 6 minutes left, and I'd just like to open the floor up to questions for the panelists. So we have representatives from, UBS, JP Morgan, Nomura, and also Lending Society, who, are here to answer your question about the exciting technologies in the fintech space. No questions?
Thank you for sharing your perspective. We've talked a lot about AI, but also one thing which is coming up is stable coins. I'm curious to hear your perspective on that front.
Who wants to take that? Who do you prefer to answer the question?
I think JP Morgan is doing quite a bit of things there, so curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Look, Kinesis obviously is sort of the business in our firm that has been looking at coin, blockchain as well. And then we've spent a lot of investment, and then has been proven to work, I guess. But again, as if you've been here throughout the entire session, there's an element of regulation, right, that needs to be overcome. So we all know, hopefully everybody sort of appreciate this. Blockchain will work in a real life situation if it's opened up, right? And it's not only inclusive to JP. And that's with any blockchain / stable. So look, this is just my personal view. I guess look, it's really wait and see in terms of how all the different central banks come together, what the regulators think about that, and progress from that.
I think just to add to that, so I did some work for the Bank of England a few years ago when blockchain was the hype, right? And one of the things that we tried to do was develop securities processing using different banks like Barclays, UBS, whatever, and actually approach them to actually create a unified blockchain. The problem is none of the banks trusted each other, right? So they couldn't agree on the data standards, they couldn't agree on the formats, they couldn't agree on who would own it, they couldn't agree on what happened when it went wrong. So the whole project fell apart. And I guess, to Tony's point, if you can't get agreement across a consortium, then you're not going to even get to that minimum viable product in order for it to become successful, right, from a cost perspective. So I think that's the biggest challenge you have.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Any more questions besides blockchain, stablecoins? More AI questions, non-AI questions, high-level digitalization question, quantum technology. Okay. All right. Okay, let's go to the last question, which is let's just jump to the wrap-up question, which is right. How do you see, in the next 2 years, how do you see the fintech space evolving? Okay, let's start with you then.
My money is still on AI, for sure. But it's just how all the different companies, fintechs or SMEs, MNEs, large corp all come together and somewhat standardize what this AI really is. I think we talk about sanction screening, fraud prevention. I think that's something that already across the industry has sort of laid the foundation. That is something common / standard. My guess is finding the next thing. What would be that next thing? I don't know.
Yeah, indeed.
My bet is on technology being much more user-friendly than what it is right now. It is going to be incredibly personalized. It is going to be incredibly easy to use, and we're going to have more and more tools at our disposal which we never ever had before, right? So I'm really looking forward to it.
Forward to that when I can use a crypto wallet without worrying about the keys get stolen. Yes.
Probably the next 2 years is probably like what these guys are doing at UBS, which is all around agentic AI. So AI is actually going out into the universe, actually doing things for you in real life. But that also means I think we're going to have a lot more stricter regulation coming in over the next 2 years. And then I also think that we need to be better in terms of building trust in AI solutions. So one of the things that we were thinking about was what about constitutional AI? So the idea here is where you write a written constitution that the AI has to abide by. And so therefore it will look at the constitution before an output comes out, and actually it's been proven that it won't jump as many guardrails if you can actually do that. But then there's a whole bunch of other policy questions as who writes the constitution? Is it the government? Is it the company? Is it someone else? How does that actually work? And then also when you look at kind of regulated industries like financial services, actually a lot of the times the constitution requires a level of context as well. And then with that nuance, how do you actually code it? How do you codify it? And then how do you legally prove it against written text? So these are things I think that are going to be coming up over the next couple of years in order to build more trust in the AI systems we build.
I think it's kind of like a circular kind of discussion, isn't it? Some would say, right, now that we have chatbots and all this Gen AI that's very creative and able to generate answers for you, why not ask them what they think, right? And then we get into the question of whether AI should have rights, human rights as well. But that's a separate discussion. I think it's a fascinating topic. Yes, Kelvin.
I think Just when we talk about future for fintech, right? I think we've always been called as alternative financing. I do think that after 10 years of development, as well as technology innovations, as well as relationship with banks, so we are soon going to move from being alternative financing to mainstream financing. Instead of being called SME fintech lender, we'll just be called SME lender. And I do think that a large part of this collaboration will be driven by both local champions when it comes to fintech lenders as well as international banks. In fact, I think HSBC was our first lender in 2020, and we're also the first startup that lent in Southeast Asia, and have since then conquered the entire startup scene for lending. Right? We do think that working with international banks can really have a better chance as we move towards maturity and being a major player in terms of financial inclusion in Southeast Asia. Hence our corporate funding societies.
Alright, so Kelvin, you mentioned HSBC, so you have 3 other banks here, you should approach. Alright, so on that note, time's up. So thank you so much for your attention, and let's give a round of applause to our panelists.